This is the footage they said we would never see on an open source feed. A single Ukrainian operator sitting in a modified van 60 kilometers behind the front line, wearing a pair of commercial virtual reality goggles that cost $380 at a consumer electronics store, just destroyed a $14 million Russian T-90M main battle tank. He didn't fire an anti-tank missile. He didn't call in an airstrike. He didn't need a forward observer, a fire control officer, or a targeting committee. He launched a swarm. 14 first-person view drones, each one built for under $400 from off-the-shelf components ordered through Chinese e-commerce platforms, converged on that tank from 4 different compass headings simultaneously. The tank's active protection system, a $2 million reactive armor package designed to defeat incoming missiles, intercepted 3 of them. It was overwhelmed by the remaining 11. The tank burned in 40 seconds Tuesday, March 18th, 2026, 0914 hours local time, somewhere in Zaporizhia Oblast. For the first time in the history of armored warfare, a vehicle specifically engineered to survive the modern battlefield was defeated by a technology that did not exist as a weapon system a decade ago, assembled by civilians, operated by a single person at a cost per kill ratio that no military economist on Earth had modeled as possible. The $400 drone just murdered the $14 million tank, and it did it 11 times over. Buckle up, because what you just watched is not a battlefield curiosity. It is the obsolescence of the entire post-World War II theory of military power. And no government, no defense contractor, no Pentagon planning document, and no NATO doctrine is ready for what comes next. Here is what you need to understand before we go any further. The drone swarm revolution is not coming. It is here. It is not experimental. It is not a concept being tested in a laboratory at DARPA. It is the dominant tactical reality on the most active conventional warfare front on the planet right now, and it has been for 18 months. Sources inside the U.S. Army's Futures Command describe the internal assessment of what is happening in Ukraine as a, quote, Category 5 doctrinal emergency. That is not language the Army uses about adversary equipment advances. The last time American military planners used emergency language about an adversarial technology shift was in 2007. When Iranian-supplied EFP roadside bombs were killing American soldiers at a rate that conventional armor protection could not address. But that crisis had a solution. The MRAP vehicle program, which cost $47 billion and took 4 years to deploy at scale. This crisis does not have a procurement solution because the weapon is not a weapon in any traditional sense. It is a software ecosystem built on consumer hardware that costs less than a used car and doubles in capability approximately every 8 months. The Pentagon cannot outspend this, it cannot outmanufacture it, and it can according to 4 separate classified assessments leaked to defense journalists in the past 90 days, currently defeat it at scale in any operational theater it is likely to fight in. To understand why the drone swarm has become the most disruptive military technology since nuclear weapons, and I use that comparison deliberately with full awareness of its weight, you have to understand the specific technical architecture that makes it so catastrophically effective. A modern FPV drone swarm is not a formation of individual aircraft operating independently. It is a networked kill system built on 3 distinct technical layers. Layer 1 is the platform layer, individual airframes, typically 5-inch or 7-inch quadcopters built on carbon fiber frames, running brushless motors powered by 4 seconds. Lithium polymer batteries that provide approximately 11 minutes of flight time at combat speeds up to 140 kilometers per hour. The warhead is typically a modified RPG-7 rocket-propelled grenade round or a purpose-built shaped charge, weighing between 200 and 400 grams, capable of penetrating up to 400 millimeters of rolled homogeneous armor. Each unit costs between $300 and $800 to produce, depending on the quality of components. Ukraine is currently manufacturing approximately 200,000 of these airframes per month. Russia is producing approximately 150,000 per month. So we are talking about combined drone production at the front exceeding 4 million units per year at a total production cost of roughly $1.4 billion annually for both sides combined. Compare that to the cost of the weapon systems they are defeating: $14 million for a T-90M, $8 million for a Bradley IFV, $3.2 million for an M109 Paladin self-propelled howitzer. The arithmetic of modern warfare has been permanently, catastrophically inverted. Layer 2 is the coordination layer, and this is where the technology transitions from impressive to genuinely terrifying. Early FPV combat drones were manually piloted, one operator per aircraft, line or sight video feed, range limited to approximately 3 kilometers. That model is 18 months obsolete. What sources inside Ukrainian military intelligence describe as the current generation, and they call it Generation 4, uses a mesh networking protocol originally developed for disaster relief communications that allows individual drones to share targeting data with every other drone in the swarm in real time without a centralized command node and without requiring continuous operator input. In practical terms, the operator designates the target, the swarm coordinates its own attack geometry, individual drones negotiate with each other through the mesh network to avoid duplicating approach vectors, to assign priority order of attack, and to dynamically reassign targets if a primary objective is destroyed or protected. The human is not flying the drones. The human is directing a distributed kill decision made by 14 computers flying 14 aircraft simultaneously. This is not autonomous weapons in the science fiction sense, but it is autonomous weapons in every practical military and legal sense that matters. And that distinction, the distinction between the human pulled the trigger and the human pointed and the system decided how to fire, is the legal and ethical abyss that no arms control treaty, no international law framework, and no rules of engagement currently addresses. But here's the catch. Layer 3 is what transforms this from a battlefield innovation into a civilizational problem. Layer 3 is accessibility. The entire software stack running a Generation 4 drone swarm, the mesh networking protocol, the target designation interface, the attack geometry coordination algorithm, the warhead arming and detonation logic is open source. It is on GitHub. It has been downloaded 340,000 times in the last 18 months, according to repository analytics. The hardware to run it costs less than $5,000 for a 10-unit swarm. The skills required to operate it are roughly equivalent to the skills required to fly a consumer racing drone, a hobby that approximately 2.7 million Americans currently practice. We are talking about a weapons system of genuine military lethality that is accessible right now, today, to any non-state actor, terrorist organization, drug cartel, or domestic extremist group with $5,000 a GitHub account and a month of training. The threat matrix for this technology extends far beyond the conventional battlefield. It extends into your city, into your airport, into your power grid, and into every piece of critical infrastructure that has been designed and built on the assumption that the only adversaries capable of attacking it at military scale were nation states. Nobody is talking about what this means for American soil, and that silence is the most dangerous thing about this entire conversation. Here is the threat scenario that, according to sources briefed on the most recent DHS threat assessment, currently generates more anxiety inside the counterterrorism community than any other single vector, a hostile non-state actor. And for specificity, let's use the model of a well-funded cartel or a foreign intelligence-supported domestic cell acquires 50 FPV combat drones. Total cost, $25,000. They operate from the back of 2 pickup trucks on public roads. They target the 3 primary electrical transmission substations that supply power to a major American metropolitan area. Each substation is an outdoor facility protected by a chain link fence and a security camera. There are no active air defense systems protecting them. There are no phalanx close-in weapon systems, no directed energy emitters, no electronic warfare jammers. The attack takes 7 minutes. The substations are destroyed and the metropolitan area loses power. It does not get it back for 6 to 8 weeks because the specific transformer components destroyed cost $3 million each, are manufactured almost exclusively in South Korea and Germany, and have lead times of 4 to 6 months. We are talking about a $25,000 attack causing $200 billion in economic damage, 40,000 deaths from loss of medical infrastructure, and a cascading collapse of water treatment, food distribution, and communication systems that no disaster response plan currently models. This is not a hypothetical. This is a described scenario in classified DHS and CISA planning documents that sources characterize as, quote, the most credible near-term critical infrastructure attack vector in the national threat portfolio. It has not happened yet. The technology to execute it has been commercially available for 14 months. It gets worse. Let's look at the military dimension because the implications for American power projection, the ability to deploy and sustain forces in a contested theater, are being discussed in terms that, according to sources inside the Joint Chiefs of Staff, have not been used since the shock of the Soviet nuclear test in 1949. Here is what the data shows. The U.S. military currently fields approximately 920 M1A2 Abrams main battle tanks. Each cost $10.2 million. The entire Abrams fleet represents a capital investment of approximately $9.4 billion, built up over 40 years of procurement and constituting the armored backbone of the Army's warfighting capability in any major peer-competitor conflict, based on the loss rates observed in Ukraine, where Russian T-90Ms, which are broadly comparable in protection level to the Abrams, a drone swarm campaign of the type currently being conducted in Zaporizhia, would inflict 50% losses on the Abrams fleet within approximately 90 days of sustained combat. Not because the Abrams is a bad tank, it is arguably the best in the world, but because the drone swarm attack vector is not something the Abrams was designed to defeat, cannot be defeated by its existing active protection system, and cannot be countered by any currently fielded U.S. Army electronic warfare system at the scale of a full armored division in contact. The Army's entire armored warfare doctrine, built at a cost of trillions of dollars over 5 decades, is effectively obsolete against a $400 consumer product. That sentence should make every taxpayer in this country furious. The defense industrial response to this crisis is, according to sources inside the defense acquisition community, simultaneously inadequate and almost comically misaligned with the actual threat, the Pentagon's current primary. Counter-drone initiative is the SHORAD program, that is short-range air defense, which has produced the MS SHORAD system, a Stryker armored vehicle carrying a 30mm cannon, Stinger missiles, Hellfire missiles, and an electronic warfare suite. Each MS SHORAD unit costs $17 million. It is designed to defeat conventional aircraft, cruise missiles, and rotary wing threats against a swarm of $5,400 drones attacking simultaneously from multiple vectors. A single MS SHORAD system can engage 3 to 4 targets per minute with its cannon and missiles. The remaining 46 drones hit their targets unimpeded. The math is not ambiguous. Raytheon is developing a directed energy counter-drone system, essentially a high-powered microwave emitter that can theoretically defeat swarms by frying their electronics. Current cost per unit, $4.2 million. Projected deployment timeline 2029. Current drone swarm threat timeline. Right now, the procurement cycle is 3 years behind the threat curve, and the threat curve is accelerating. Meanwhile, China, and this is the number that stops every defense economist cold, China is currently manufacturing FPV combat drone components at a rate of approximately 80 million units per year across its consumer electronics supply chain. Those components are dual use. They are legally exported globally. They cannot be meaningfully interdicted through export controls. The drone supply chain is not a vulnerability that can be sanctioned away. Let's push the scenario to its absolute worst case dimension, because that is the professional obligation of anyone taking this seriously. Worst case scenario 1, China activates this technology in a Taiwan Strait scenario. The People's Liberation Army has been observed, according to satellite imagery analysis published by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, pre-positioning drone manufacturing infrastructure on Fujian province of coastal bases, directly opposite Taiwan. The assessment, which sources say was briefed to the National Security Council in February 2026, describes a concept of operations in which the PLA launches a coordinated drone swarm campaign against Taiwan's air defense, radar network, naval base infrastructure, and command and control nodes simultaneously with a conventional air and missile bombardment. The drone swarms serve as a saturation layer, not necessarily destroying every target, but consuming the interceptor magazine of Taiwan's Patriot and Skybow air defense systems, which carry a finite number of $3 million interceptor missiles against an effectively infinite number of $400 drones. When the Patriot batteries are empty, the conventional missile strike finds uncontested airspace. The invasion fleet crosses the strait. The entire scenario, from drone launch to air defense, magazine exhaustion, takes 45 minutes. Every American war game that has modeled this scenario, according to sources familiar with the classified RAND assessments, results in Taiwanese air defense collapse before the first American carrier strike group can generate a combat air patrol. The drone swarm is not a supporting weapon in this scenario. It is the decisive weapon. And it costs $40 million to execute against a $22 billion air defense system. Worst case scenario 2 is domestic, and it is a scenario that generates the most classified concern because it requires no military adversary at all. Sources inside the FBI's Weapons of Mass Destruction Directorate described an internal assessment circulated at the deputy director level in January 2026 that models the use of drone swarms carrying radiological material, specifically commercially available radioactive isotopes that can be acquired through medical supply chains or industrial theft, dispersed over a major American city in a coordinated multi-vector attack. The assessment does not describe a nuclear weapon. It describes a radiological dispersal device, what the defense community calls a dirty drone swarm. 20 aircraft carrying cesium-137 or cobalt-60 payloads and flying a grid pattern over a 3-square-mile area of a major financial district at 3 a.m., dispersing their payloads and crashing before any detection system triggers a response. The contamination is not immediately lethal, but it renders 3 square miles of a major city uninhabitable for 30 years. It triggers a mass evacuation. It collapses commercial real estate values in the surrounding 50 square miles. It causes an estimated $800 billion in direct economic damage and a permanent psychological trauma to the American public's sense of safety in urban environments. The drones required for this attack cost $8,000. The isotopes, according to the assessment, could be acquired by a sufficiently motivated actor within 60 days. The attack cannot be prevented by any currently deployed domestic air defense or early warning system. The FBI assessment characterizes the probability of an attempt within 5 years as, quote, uncomfortably non-trivial. Those are the exact words, uncomfortably non-trivial. The international dimension of this technology shift is already rewriting the balance of power in ways that are almost entirely invisible to the American public. Here is what foreign capitals are watching. Iran has been operating FPV drone manufacturing operations at scale for 22 months, according to intercepted procurement intelligence shared with allied governments. The current Iranian production capacity is estimated at 35,000 units per month, with significant technical assistance from North Korean electronics manufacturers and Chinese component suppliers. Iran does not need to develop a nuclear weapon to threaten American aircraft carriers in the Persian Gulf. It needs to manufacture 10,000 combat drones, launch them from small boat platforms distributed across the Gulf, and swarm a carrier strike group. A Nimitz-class carrier has approximately 2,500 phalanx CIW's rounds available for self-defense against a simultaneous swarm of 10,000 drones. The magazine is exhausted in roughly 4 minutes. What happens in the subsequent 6 minutes before the combat air patrol can intercept the remaining swarm is a catastrophe for which there is currently no classified or unclassified American operational response. The carrier is not sunk by this attack, but it is so severely damaged that it ceases to be a functioning combat platform. The $13 billion carrier, the symbol of American power projection for 70 years, is effectively mission killed by a $4 million technology investment. The deterrent calculus of the entire post-1945 American security architecture rests on the assumption that adversaries cannot cost-effectively challenge American carrier power. That assumption is now functionally incorrect. The legal and ethical architecture surrounding autonomous weapons has been collapsing in slow motion since 2015, and the drone swarm crisis has now pushed it into outright freefall. Here is what you need to understand about the international law. Dimension. The 1949 Geneva Conventions require that combatants be capable of distinguishing between military targets and civilian objects, the principle of distinction, and that attacks be proportionate to military necessity. Human Rights Watch and the International Committee of the Red Cross have both published assessments, according to sources familiar with the relevant legal reviews, concluding that a fully autonomous drone swarm operating through a mesh network coordination protocol without continuous human targeting authorization violates both principles as currently interpreted under customary international humanitarian law. The counter-argument from the United States, Russia, China, and Israel, the 4 nations most actively developing autonomous lethal systems, is that a human designates the initial target, making the human the legally responsible actor in the targeting chain. This argument has been explicitly rejected by 17 nations at the UN Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, which has been attempting to negotiate a legally binding autonomous weapons prohibition since 2017. The negotiations have produced 0 binding agreements. The technology, meanwhile, has outpaced the diplomatic timeline by approximately 3 generations. We are now operating in a legal vacuum where the Most consequential weapons development since the atomic bomb is proceeding with no binding arms control framework, no verification mechanism, no prohibition on proliferation, and no international consensus on the threshold between human supervised and fully autonomous that would trigger a prohibition. The void in international law is not a footnote, it is an invitation. Here's what the historical record demands we acknowledge. Every revolutionary weapons technology in modern history has triggered a doctrine crisis, an arms control crisis, and a proliferation crisis simultaneously. The machine gun made the static trench inevitable in 914 and produced 4 years of industrial slaughter before generals adapted. The submarine made the convoy system necessary in 917 and nearly strangled Britain before the countermeasure was deployed at scale. The atomic bomb produced the 968 Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty 23 years after Hiroshima, after the Soviet Union, United Kingdom, France, and China had all acquired the weapon. The pattern is consistent. The technology arrives, the doctrine collapses, the arms control process begins years too late, and the interim period is defined by catastrophic miscalculation. We are in the interim period right now. The drone swarm technology arrived in militarily decisive form in 2023. The doctrine has already collapsed. Every senior military planner interviewed in background by defense journalists in the last 6 months has described a version of the same crisis. The playbook doesn't work anymore, and the arms control process has not begun. The United States government does not have a coherent policy on autonomous weapons proliferation. It does not have an agreed definition of what constitutes an autonomous weapon. It does not have an export control regime capable of interdicting the component supply chains that make drone swarms possible. And it does not have, according to sources inside the Office of the Secretary of Defense, a fielded counter-drone system capable of defending a fixed American military installation against a 500-unit swarm attack. As of today, April 10th, 2026, the psychological dimension of this crisis is not being discussed, and the silence is itself a form of institutional denial. Here is what the data shows about how drone swarm warfare is changing the human experience of combat. The psychological literature on remote warfare, developed primarily through the study of Predator and Reaper drone operators, established that physical distance from killing does not eliminate psychological trauma. It redistributes it. PTSD rates among Predator operators were found in a 2019 Air Force study to be statistically indistinguishable from combat infantry rates. But Predator operators were targeting known individuals, receiving intelligence packages, observing the target for hours before strike. FPV swarm operators are operating at a fundamentally different cognitive and moral level. They are making kill decisions in seconds against targets identified visually from 150 meters at a pace that can involve multiple engagements per hour. Ukrainian drone units report average engagement rates of 4 to 7 kills per operator per 8-hour shift. The psychological literature has no framework for this. The military has no mental health infrastructure designed for this. We are creating a generation of warriors on all sides of every conflict where this technology proliferates, who are experiencing a form of moral injury that no existing clinical model addresses. And we are simultaneously creating a technology transfer pathway from those combat theaters to civilian populations, where the same skill set, the same software, and the same hardware is accessible to anyone with the motivation to acquire it. And so we arrive at the place this conversation was always heading, the place where the technology crisis becomes a civilization question. The drone swarm does not merely break modern warfare, it breaks the fundamental assumption on which modern civilization security architecture rests, that there is a meaningful, defensible distinction between the battlefield and the home front, that the state has a monopoly on organized violence at military scale, and that the gap between what a nation state can do with force and what a non-state actor can do with force is large enough to sustain the basic order of civil society. The machine gun did not threaten that distinction. The nuclear bomb intensified it by making state power so catastrophically consequential that non-state actors couldn't touch it. But the $400 drone swarm dissolves it for the first time since the invention of gunpowder. The barrier to military-scale violence has dropped below the economic threshold of the individual. That is not a defense procurement problem. That is a civilizational stress test, and it is being conducted in real time. without a safety net on a planet that has not yet developed the institutional capacity to respond to it. Watch the defense authorization debate in Congress over the next 6 months. Specifically, watch the funding line for counter drone development, which sources say is currently a rounding error relative to legacy procurement programs like the B-21 Raider bomber at $692 million per aircraft and the Ford-class carrier at $13 billion per hull. Watch for the next major swarm attack against a U.S. allied military asset, and according to threat assessments, sources say it is a matter of when, not if. Watch the Chinese drone manufacturing output figures from Shenzhen and Dongguan, which are publicly tracked through export data and represent the clearest leading indicator of where the global swarm capability is heading. And watch, most importantly, for the first domestic drone swarm incident on American soil, because the FBI assesses it as probable within this decade and possibly within this administration's term. The history books will record this moment as the inflection point, the moment when the most powerful military in human history discovered that the weapon which would break its doctrine didn't come from Moscow or Beijing. It came from a consumer electronics warehouse in Shenzhen, cost $400, and was assembled by a 23-year-old in a garage. The swarm is already in the air. Subscribe, because the next chapter of this story will not wait for anyone to be ready for it.